Alright, so I went ahead and I clamped and glued all of the cracks that I found, and everything actually turned out pretty good. A couple of the joints I had to re-glue. There was the one up front I showed you that split after I glued it, but I went ahead and re-glued it, and now that is really strong. It is not coming apart. And I went ahead and I used a mixture of the two glues as I did it. So the first time around I would use this, and the second time I did use it on here. It depended on the way that the crack was made and how easily it could be to re-clamp it, because this stuff dries in less than 10 seconds. So if I need to take time to clamp, obviously I can't clamp using this, so I have to use the Gorilla Glue. But for stuff like this crack here, well, the crack that was here, um, I used Gorilla Glue at first, and that actually soaked into there was actually a couple splinters in here, so I really poured it in there real thick to get a lot of material in there, and that held good. But this major crack re-split after applying pressure. So what I was able to do was just single clamp this and apply this stuff. So this stuff is actually ridiculously strong. This is basically super glue, but um, I guess it's more or less made for wood. It soaks into the wood grain and everything, so if you can get it to soak into the wood grain and you can actually push both of the grains together, it's not coming apart. This stuff is ridiculously good for gluing wood. So I used it on here, and I mean, this is stronger than, I guarantee you it'll break somewhere else before it'll break in that crack again. So the stock piece, I was able to just put that in a vise and clamp it up. I used the Gorilla Glue to glue that together, and that had a lot of wood grain that it could soak into, so that ain't going nowhere. So those two cracks are good. Like I said, this one's good. And the final crack was the one that actually split this completely apart. And it did end up breaking into two pieces eventually after working with it so much. Um, so I ended up I used the Gorilla Glue, and I actually put the gun back together mostly. I put the receiver and barrel in, and I basically assembled it and put the barrel rings on, or the bands on, so that I used the bands as the clamp system. So obviously I added a couple clamps also other than just the barrel bands, but they basically held it in place so that it would be a way that it would clamp itself and not break when I re-put the barrel clamps on. If you understand what I'm saying? So it might not be in perfect fashion the way it used to be, but it won't break when I try to put it back together. It'll be in the form that it will be when I put it back together. That's why I did it like that. Um, but I did use the Gorilla Glue and it kind of worked. I did a little squeeze and it actually did split, but it didn't come completely apart. So what I did was I just kind of squirted a bunch of this in here and I held it real tight. Like I said, this stuff glues in about 10 seconds, so I just kind of sat there and held it together, blew on it a little bit, and it ended up sealing up pretty good. I mean, this is really strong. I can't imagine this coming apart anytime soon. So what I'm doing now is I'm just sanding it. So I have 400, 600, and 800 grit sandpaper. I probably could have went with like some 300, 200 for the initial sanding, but I really don't want to take much material off. I'm just kind of trying to smooth it out. So when I clamped this together, it wasn't, like I said, it wasn't 100% the exact seam that it was. So there is a very small overhang. So I'm just kind of sitting there smoothing this out, and it is kind of, I mean, you can see where it's taken off all the grease and the old stain, but it's relatively, the way that I'm removing it is that it's not, I'm trying to do it evenly and also maybe a little bit spotty, because it still looks pretty cool the way it is. So like I said, I'm trying to keep it as nicely textured as it was before. So like I said, as I sit here and just kind of go with this 400, it's not removing much material at all, and that's what I wanted. So I mean, I don't have to 100% remove the step necessarily. I just want it to be nice and smooth, and it's about to that point. So this is about done being sanded here. I'm not doing much to it. I just want it to look and feel smooth. So I'm almost done with this handguard piece. Not much to it. I mean, that's relatively smooth. You can't really feel anything there, and it looks pretty evenly colored and textured. And I'm not too worried about getting what's in here. I just wanted to make sure, because I sat there with a chisel item and just kind of chiseled out basically the big glue chunks. I don't care how it looks in here at all. It's going to be obviously on the barrel, so I'm not going to see it at all until I take it apart, but I don't care what it looks like when it's apart. So, like I said, I'm just kind of removing the large stuff and smoothing it, just smoothing the glue out, just so I don't have any large pressure bumps when it's sitting on the actual barrel. And that's relatively smooth in there. Most of it's gone. So I'd say that's pretty good. And like I said, I'm running 400 grit right now. I will redo everything with 600 and then 800. So the stock is actually, I shouldn't really have to do much to the stock other than kind of sand this down a little bit and then make sure this is as flush as I can get it. Now there's a little bit of glue residue from the other glue because it's super runny. I just kind of wanted to smooth that out as best as I could. So this is the boring part. Nothing much really happens here. And there's such a large layer of, I guess, whatever the stain is or the varnish or whatever they used on it to, initially. It's such a thick coating that it's actually hard to remove, which is a good thing for me. So like I said, I'm just trying to keep it, I want it to look how I got it as much as possible. So as I sand it, I'm using really, really high grit sandpaper as to not remove as much material as possible. And right then and there, you can see it's already removed all that excess glue that was on that spot. This is pretty much the boring, tedious part of this whole job. If my camera would work, so there's what that side looks like. Flip it over. So pretty decent overall. It's got a pretty decent look to it. I'm happy with the handguard.